Welcome you all here tonight for our public forum on the possible reuse and of the center, Hatfield Center School. And this is a culmination of a long process that this committee, the Center School Site Assessment and Reuse Advisory Group, had come together and formed an opinion and issued a letter to the Board of Selectmen after studying the center school. And just give you a little bit of background of how this all started. About a year ago, we received a grant from the State Department of Housing and Community Development to undertake a possible reuse of the center school. It was a $50,000 grant that we were able to hire a consultant to look at the possible uses of the school and what we would do going forward on a process that's a school that's been hanging around now for 100 years. It's a 100-year-old school, and it's been sitting vacant for 6 or 7 years now since the regional library left town. So I just want to introduce the members of our committee who've worked long and hard for over a year to come up with hopefully a solution and to present to town meeting next month. To my left is Judge Betty Parada, a longtime resident of Hatfield. Linda Wendelowski Hurley, who was a former selectman in town of Hatfield. And Stanley Szymanski, our electrical inspector and also a longtime resident of Hatfield. Missing tonight is Robert Bartlett, member of the planning board, and he's on his way to New Mexico to a hot air balloon festival, so he wasn't able to meet with us tonight. Also with us tonight is Janot Bly from the firm of HAI Architecture, who was a hired consultant who provided the services for us in helping us to decide what we want to do and make a recommendation for the center school. Also with us tonight is Jim Mazik, the Deputy Director of Operations for Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, who assisted us throughout this whole process. Under the grant, he steered us through the grant application, also helped us with the selection of the architect consulting firm. On June 11th this past year, the committee issued a letter to the Board of Selectmen with our final recommendation after a study was done by the architects. And I'd like to read the letter for the benefit of you people present tonight and also the television public. This was to the Board of Selectmen. Our study group has been working with the consultants on this project, including assistance from the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission for over a year now, and is ready to make a recommendation for the future reuse of the center school building. Unfortunately, the options are very limited, and it has been determined by the consultants that some type of housing project is the only viable option for development. The consultants have completed an extensive structural analysis of the building and investigated multiple possible reuse alternatives. And it is evident that any type of commercial use is not feasible due to the structural nature and design of the building, its current condition, and the apparent lack of market for commercial property in the center of Hatfield. The estimated cost for making basic repairs to the building and bringing it up to code is approximately $4 million. And making the possibility for any future public use unrealistic. Because of the high cost of renovation, the consultants have determined that it is probably not likely that a developer would spend that kind of money on the building itself to create a handful of housing units. To make the project economically viable, a developer would need to create a minimum of 40 units, which means that most of the parcel would need to be developed. The study group, which is our group, is recommending that the parcel be developed in a manner similar to Site Scheme A, which is contained in the architect's report on the center school building. Specifically, our recommendations are as follows. The town should sell the entire parcel with a permanent right-of-way created along the Dyke Road in a conservation easement green space created on approximately 2.5 acres at the rear of the property for public use. The number of housing units should be limited to a maximum of 40 units with a minimum of 8 units in the school, units in the school building, and the remainder of the units built out at the rear of the building. A certain percentage of the units, yet to be determined, should be handicap accessible. The deed restrictions should be placed on the exterior of the building so it is renovated in keeping with the historical architectural character. The town should go through an RFP process to determine the best proposal from private developers for the site. And an oversight committee should be established prior to the RFP process to oversee the redevelopment. The authorization to sell the property must come from town meeting, and ultimately the town must decide what its value the most. Either restore the building or the property itself. The building is beginning to deteriorate quickly, and without any action taking place soon, it will eventually need to be demolished. The current cost for demolition is estimated at $260,000. That was our recommendation in June to the Board of Selectmen. We met with the board last month, and they asked us to present a public forum, which we are doing tonight, to have the public come forward, ask any questions about the project itself, and why we came up with our recommendations. So just to give you a little bit better overview, we've asked the architect, Janot Bly from HAI Architects, to present a little presentation, which he did present at length to the Board of Selectmen back in June. And what we'd like to do, Janot, if I could turn it over to you, this would be just turning over a short, what would you want to call it, recap of your report, which is available both online, the town website, and also there's hard copies, and there's CDs available for people who want to come down and pick it up at the town administrator's, Paul Boudreau's office. So, Janot, can I just defer to you?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. We're very happy to be here tonight to review the report and the recommendations that resulted from the report, to hopefully put a process in place that would save this landmark for the beautiful town of Hatfield. The building is, as mentioned, 100 years old. It's Jacobean style. It's something that's highly unlikely to be replicated if it were lost. And the overall state of the building is such that it is deteriorating very quickly. It's been vacant for a full 10 years now since the Western Mass Regional Library moved out in 2004. There's a number of leaks in the building, a number of the building elements, which I'll review quickly. I pulled out just the visual portions of the report. This is probably about a quarter of the, or a little less than a quarter of the complete report, just to give some highlights. I was going to introduce the teams, but that was already done. I just also mentioned some of the consultants that we brought on board. Maura Cochran from Bartram & Cochran did the market analysis portion of the report. They're a national real estate consulting firm. Lindgren & Sharples, they're mechanical, structural, and plumbing engineers, or mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection. Berry Engineers and Constructors were the structural analysis engineers. The report included 5 major sections. There's an overview of the goals and process. There's a detailed review of all of the building elements and their existing condition. There's a section on the where we reviewed all of the potential uses, commercial, community uses, residential as well, of the building based on its infrastructure. And also on the zoning restrictions and parking requirements and such, and the impact on the site for each. And I pulled out a few of those examples that I'll show. The next section was the marketing analysis, which included demographic information, an action plan based on the results of that. Maura had interviewed a number of developers, real estate professionals in the area, a number of community groups, town departments, and all those are listed in the report. There's the development recommendations where we show just the feasibility of the recommendation that we developed, and then the appendix includes a lot of the supporting information on the case studies and economic multipliers and such. The site itself, as you know, right across the street on Main Street, is the three-story brick structure. There's a basement that is mostly includes a mechanical system. It was the old locker rooms and storage rooms in the building. There are two finished floors, first and second floor. Mainly the original classroom buildings are still intact. There's 4 classrooms with a corridor running north and south to the end stairs, and then an attic space. There were about 6,650 square foot per floor. There's about 13,000 square foot of usable space in the building. The building envelope, which is the exterior walls, the roof, the windows, the doors, a lot of the roofing tiles, they thin over time, the slate, and a lot of them are getting thin. You can see a lot of them are cracked, they're chipped. A lot of the copper nails that hold them in place are deteriorating, so a lot of the tiles are slipping out. So there's need of a major renovation of the roof structure. A lot of the flashing on the perimeter on the parapet walls is pulling away around all the building elements of on the roof, such as the cupola, the chimneys, the dormers. There's no gutters or downspouts, which is good for the roof, but there are some on the overhang, some of the wooden members, especially in the valleys, there's missing pieces or there's water damage. You see the chimney cap is cracked, and the cupola itself, while we think it is indeed savable, the wood structure is intact, it is fairly contaminated with all the pigeons that live in the space. So it would need to be decontaminated and scraped and repainted. It may even require pulling it off with a crane, restoring it, and then putting it back. There's some minor cracks in the foundation from settlement. Due to the fact that there are no gutters and downspouts, there's a lot of splashing of water along the bottom, so that there's a lot of water seeping through the walls into the basement, since there's no water drainage around the building. Some of the limestone accents have deteriorated, but the majority of them are intact. The windows on the street side, we believe are savable. They would just need to be scraped and refinished and repainted. The windows on the east side, they were replaced with aluminum sashes back in probably around the 80s. At the end of their useful life, and probably would need to be replaced with more energy efficient windows. The front doors have rotted significantly, and they're actually difficult to open now. And the doors on the back side as well, out to grade. There's metal panels that were placed over the lintels and sealed, so there may be deterioration on the original lintels that were in place, whether they were wood or limestone. And there's a shed structure on the back that would need to be demolished that is being used by the town now. The attic space, even though it's a fairly large space due to the pitch of the roof, it has a lot of steel structure that's been added at some point, likely to pull in the top of the masonry bearing walls. And so because of all that structure, there's no usable occupiable space in the attic itself. As you see, as I mentioned, a lot of the original school hallways, woodwork are all intact, even the chalkboards. The basement, the original boiler is still in place. Our mechanical engineers have determined that the boiler would need to be replaced if the building were to be reused. And all of what you see here is all asbestos insulation. There's quite a bit of hazardous material in the building as far as asbestos insulation, lead paint, and mold due to the water seeping in through the foundation, the brick walls. As you can see there, it's all chipping off. And the oil tanks are also in the basement. This is where we evaluated the site itself as far as different uses. First, we just if we just use the building itself and convert it into units, how many spaces maximum could we get around the building? And it was 37, which would be sufficient if a developer just developed the building itself. But we determined that was not to be financially feasible. This is another example of commercial spaces. If you just use the building for commercial or professional spaces, how much parking you would require, and it extends into the baseball field in the back of the building, but doesn't go as far as the field hockey. This would be for 40 residential units, the amount of space that would be required for the building footprint itself, and then parking. And then this is if you absolutely tried to max out per zoning the amount of commercial space through an addition to the building and the amount of parking you see that takes up the entire site. The marketing analysis, as I mentioned, included interviews with a lot of local groups, as well as demographic and economic regional information that resulted in the recommendations for residential use as being the only viable reuse for the building, and as mentioned, would require additional units. 40 was thought to be the minimum number that would interest a sufficient number of developers. 60 would be more ideal, but it was felt as a consensus that that would be too many units and would overwhelm the site. So we tried to work from that recommendation of 40 units as the baseline. We developed two schemes just to show the feasibility. There's many variations that could be developed, but this shows each of these orange shapes would be 4 units, 2 on the first level and 2 on the second level. And there's 8 of those clusters that would result in 32 units, and then assuming approximately 8 units in the building itself would result in the 40 units. This tries to disperse the units a bit more so it feels more in character with the town of Hatfield, and disperse the parking a bit more as well. And it results in approximately 2.5 acres of open space in the rear of the site, which isn't sufficient for the field hockey, but it does provide a public use space for a park or another use, and it maintains the access road back to the river, and provides potential for some parking that is not existing now for the open space on the site. Another solution we tried to see if there was any way to maximize the amount of open space if we group the buildings together. As you see, it creates much larger blocks of buildings, and it also creates much larger fields of parking. And we were surprised that it only resulted in 2.8 acres, so it's about from 2.5 to 2.8 acres, and it's much more linear space instead of one larger group of space in the back. We developed 3 different options, again, to show the feasibility of putting units within the center school itself. So this is the floor plan of the center school, the first floor, and it shows maintaining the existing layout of the corridor on the street side and the stairs on the ends, but the corridor is reduced to approximately half the size that it is now, and then there's 4 one-bedroom units that range from approximately 800 to 975 square feet each. And then a similar layout on the second floor, so you result in the 8 units that meets the site plan that we developed. There's common spaces in the 2 projections that are on the street side. This is option 1, so first and second floor plan. This is option 2. Similar to the first one, there's 4 one-bedroom units. They're slightly smaller because we've added stairs within each of the groupings in order to provide an alternative layout on the second floor. So on the second floor of option 2, rather than maintaining the corridor and the stair layout that we have 4 larger units that range from 2 to 3 bedrooms. And then the third option, again, similar to the last one where we have the first floor, 4 one-bedroom units with the stairs added. Then on the third floor, instead of having 2 large units on the ends, we have 2 smaller units, so there's a total of 6 units on the second floor, which would allow you to have 10 units in the building versus 8. This is just showing the feasibility of it. There's many different variations. We didn't explore putting studio apartments in or micro units that would increase the number of units that you could include in the building. And this, again, just shows the shape, those orange shapes you saw on the site plans. This is a large view of what something could look like, and it's based on 2-bedroom units. Again, you could specify that they're 1-bedroom or 3-bedroom, whatever the town would want. And then our preliminary cost estimate for the development for the entire site with the renovation to the building, to the center school building itself, the development of the units within that building, the 32 units on the site, and all of the site development costs come to just over $12 million. And that's it.
Okay.
It's going to get bright.
Okay, basically, that's where we're at tonight. We're down to probably 3 options. We're going to, one, we can continue to do nothing, which the committee was strongly against. We've done that for too many years. Secondly, we hope the town would entertain our proposal to go out for an RFP, to sell the land. First of all, to give authorization to possibly sell the land. Again, possibly sell the land to a developer to rehab the school and develop units of housing there. Also, the other alternative I believe the selectmen are going to come up with is to demolish or dismantle the building. It would be an option. They're going to offer, I believe, as an article on town meeting. The draft of the warrant is being developed right now, so, and that's where we are tonight, and we'd like to open it up to discussion, whoever wants to speak about it, and we'll try to answer any questions we can in regard to the study itself and why we came up with our recommendations, which, again, we really didn't have a lot of choices based upon the study that was completed. The study is 167 pages long, and it's quite intensive, and it's a lot of reading material, and it's very well. I think we got quite a bang for our buck on this one. And again, it was through a state grant, and the town didn't have to outlay any money, although it's probably taxpayer money overall. So I'd like to open it up to the floor for any questions people might have, and anything goes, I guess. Mark.
I did read the report, or not read the entire report, but I went through the whole report, so it is quite comprehensive. I have to congratulate you on a good bit of work for that report. I'm just wondering about the land and whether or not all the land needs to be sold, or whether some development could be worked out where the town actually owns, say, the back 2.5 acres or 3 acres against the riverfront. I think that's rather precious property.
Correct.
And I know you're proposing a conservation restriction or something like that, but I'm wondering if a similar development with approaching 40 units could be worked out where the town actually does not have to sell the riverfront property, but holds on to 2.5 or 3 acres and work the development from the remaining land. I don't know if 40 is such a sacrosanct number, but somewhere between 32 and 40 or something like that. I mean, was that considered, and is that still a possibility? I would think within
yes,
the
it
zone.
is. We recommended that a committee be formed once the town decides whether to sell it. That committee is going to be the most important committee in this whole process, we feel. That's where the town will have an opportunity to put restriction on, to decide whether they want to put a price tag on the building, sell the property. Now, East Hampton just had a similar thing at Parsons School. They had a similar committee like ours. They put a price tag of an old school for $450,000 to sell the school to a developer. That was in the proposal, part of the RFP process. They're just a few steps ahead of us in that for their Parsons Street school. But they came up with similar recommendations to sell it to an outside developer to see what proposals they could get to redevelop in their school. So it's still open. That was considered. I know Stanley Buster's talked about, Bob Bartlett talked about it. How will we protect that buffer between the back of the property and the river, which is a resource that the town really enjoys. And that's why one of our proposals was to make sure the lane is open on the south side of the property to give us access right to the river. And that can be developed. So.
Because how many towns have center of town riverfront property like Hatfield does? I mean, I think it's kind of too precious to sell the whole piece. That's my opinion.
And I just would like to say that 40 units is what you guys came up with, that developers might be interested, the minimum.
That was the threshold, yeah.
But that's not cast in stone. Someone may come and say they only want to use the school and then put another one or two, behind it. Everything's still, it depends on what a developer chooses to do. These are just some scenarios that they came up with, and we tried to pick the least amount to go in there and make it more spacious, so it would fit with the character of the town versus having everything just kind of bunched together.
Also,
I think it was our intent, it's 2.8 acres are going to be retained for the riverfront property as such. And I agree with you. It's very important that we retain that land as well as access to the riverfront, because it's a question really, I think, comes down to the site, the land, or sell to a housing developer. And have him develop, but yet retain enough of the property so that the town would have access to the river.
Also, we haven't, it's still in the back of our mind too. We may have a commercial entity want to go through, an RFP, involved in the RFP process. At one time, we had talked about a bank coming into the center of town for their operational, offline. They wouldn't have the, teller services or anything, but it'd be an operational center. But they're more interested in larger, newer property, so.
That's certainly, the same conclusion that, we've come to for the last 10 years with, 3 or 4 or 5 different entities looking at that property. The conclusion has always been, it doesn't make sense for anything but residential, maybe commercial. I mean, the library, the regional library looked at it, the charter school looked at it, the elementary building committee looked at it, the library building committee looked at it, and the conclusion is basically the same as what you guys have come up with, that, it's not economically feasible for any of those uses in the current marketplace.
Right. The town doesn't have $12 million to develop the site. I don't think
And
this.
the fact is, even if they use that $12 million to develop that site, it would be less advantageous a space than an $8 million new building would be.
But also,
And that's
yeah,
really the nutshell.
yeah. Also, to a developer, there's resources available to the developer that probably the town wouldn't have in a sense of tax breaks and monies available from different state grants and federal grants that are given to private concerns or nonprofits that would be able to develop the property versus the community itself. So that was one of the things we had to struggle with. But we've aired quite a bit of scenarios, what ifs all around. Jim at Pioneer Valley was very helpful in telling us what other communities have done, like in Ware and Munson and a few other ones. They've tried to do this. We're not the first ones to try to rehab an old school, but some communities have been very successful. So we'll see. I think, but it just can't remain vacant any longer. You saw the condition of if you go through the report, there's even greater detailed pictures in there how fast it's rapidly deteriorating. So something's got to be done. So I guess this is our Waterloo.
I think, our choice is we either raise it for $250,000 or whatever that number is,
Right.
and create a vacant space in the center of town, an open space, or we sell it and we end up with a $12 million tax base increase. That's really the choice we have.
Got two,
And-
that's it.
and those are the two choices.
That's it.
We spend $250,000 and have open space, or we sell it and we have a little bit of open space and a $12 million tax base increase. I know what I vote for.
I know that it seems like the committee also considered, the parking and just the number of people that would occupy the site. That seemed to be somewhat important to the whole development. When I saw some of those schemes that took up the entire site and had in excess of 300 parking spaces, as a person who lives on Elm Street, every single one of those cars, or 90% of those cars, are going to go flying by my house and all the other houses on Elm Street. And I'm just wondering how the traffic, the commercial impact or the traffic impact, was that, I didn't see that in the study. I don't know if there was much given to the traffic impact.
Well, I don't think we're going to have 300 parking spaces there, I believe.
That's if it was maxed out for
Maxed
corporate
out,
development. Yeah.
going 60, 80 units of housing, but, I think one of the scenarios was 16 extra ones. I think probably 2 to a unit. That's what we were
Well, I
figuring.
think he's referring to the commercial development and
Oh.
much higher parking counts and much higher parking
Even
coverage,
the
yeah.
60-unit residential was maybe in 150 or 160 parking spaces or something. It starts to get a lot, and the traffic impact of the comings and goings on that is actually, sizable for the residents who live on that path of travel in and out of town, especially going to 91. So I would hope that the committee would, that 40, maybe even something that gives about half the site back to the town would be something that we would.
Well, that would actually be up to a private developer. Once the town does vote to sell it, then we're gonna get RFPs to see what the developers wanna do with the property. Some might wanna do some commercial and some residential. And that'll all determine, in the town, most of the developers we talk to do not wanna lease the land. They either buy it and own it, or that's it. So,
Right, also to lease, there's a law, Jim, if I'm correct, on the law.
There's time restriction,
That's
right.
but it wasn't conducive for the money you put into it, and then you have to turn it, have a restriction of 20 or 30 years. It doesn't make financial sense.
There's some restricted general laws that only allow, 30, I think, was the maximum to lease. And you can't, it can't be like APR in 99, you get your return back on $12 million, that'd be great, but it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work.
And in respect to the traffic, you point out Elm Street, I live on Elm Street too, but let me say this, there are more than one ways to come in and out of this town. You don't have to use Elm Street necessarily. You've got Prospect Street, Brad Street, et cetera. So I think we came up with the 40 housing units because we feel that's the minimum amount that's going to attract a developer to buy this property, quite frankly. I think, we could restrict the parking, but you've got to accommodate at least 2 parking spaces for an apartment, I would think, and then also for guests.
And then if we've got conservation space in the back, you need some parking for that, otherwise.
And that's why I mentioned,
Yeah.
if we do get, the town meeting approval to do it, that next committee is going to be the most important one. And you can see in other communities, they're doing similar stuff with their property. You can, compare it to the community preservation in Florence, when they had the big restriction they put out there on develop the athletic fields and things like that. They had hearings and, public forums, input from all the communities to finally get what they wanted out there. So I would envision the same thing in the town of Hatfield. The town, whoever's on that committee would have to listen to, concerns like Harold and Mark have in regard to the restrictions they would place on it and the access to the public. It is, public property at this point, but to bring it back on the tax roll, I think is the feeling that we have as a committee was the most viable solution to an abandoned building.
So what would the vote, would the warrant have any restrictions on it in terms of what a developer could or couldn't do, or how much property was sold or wasn't sold?
That, I'd have, Jeff or Paul,
The draft really comes down to 2 things. One, sell it, give the Board of Selectmen the authority to sell, either summer or fall. And second, otherwise to demolish. So, as you've been saying, really the mechanics of all this will be worked out in the RFP. The definition of just what will go in there and the restrictions that we would like to place on the developer should go into that, should be in that as we announce it, so they know what the restrictions are coming in. So that's the opportunity to carve out that last 2 point whatever it is acres is right there.
has the selectmen had any discussion in regard to the composition of the committee, if it does go through? No, okay, just curious. Because that's,
We don't have authorization to sell yet.
right, but that's very, very important. That could be, could that be done through the article on the warrant as an amendment? How many persons?
Well, you can make any amendment you choose, but as long as it's related to the article.
And just to let you guys know, most of us didn't want to sell the building. When we came on this committee, we were basically looking to hold on to the building, and we were hoping to put in some senior housing or veterans housing. But the time frame on that is so far down the road that the building would probably fall down before we would be able to do that. So maybe a developer would be interested in putting in senior housing. We need more senior housing. The Housing Authority keeps saying they don't have any two-bedroom units, and that's what we were hoping to put over there. But maybe a developer will come forward and choose to put some senior housing, because in the report, we're pretty much a senior community.
But also,
Yeah, there was an identified need for it.
right. But also, there was one thought about housing that really struck me is, building these units, you have a second floor, a lot of them. And what better purpose would be for young, married kids or couple, young professionals. Our young professionals are leaving town. They're graduating, they graduate Smith Academy, they go to college. Very few come back. And one of the big reasons, there isn't any apartments or condos or accessible right in the community. Say you have 30 units, say you have 15 or 16, you could bring in young professionals. I'm talking, the late 20s and early 30s, a couple, maybe starting out family, they just, having a kid or something, they need that quick start. That would provide an opportunity right in the center of town for the young professionals, and that would be part of the mixed use in housing. I always thought we'd, like Linda said, some of the elderly. What about an elderly couple with an older parent? A 70-year-old couple with a 90-year-old mother-in-law, father-in-law, or an older couple with a handicapped child. If we could get a two-bedroom unit, there is a need for in the town. So maybe we can squeeze in, and it'd be up to the developer in the RFP process. So it was a reach, it was a reach. And that's why one of the reasons I joined the committee, hoping we could do something with the school. I've been member of two committees, one that knocked down Smith Academy, one knocked down the elementary school. And in both instances, there wasn't really any reuse you could do with either building compared to what you probably could do with this one. There wasn't community preservation around at the time. The elementary school needed extensive repairs, and the community decided they didn't want to, save the part of it. And they voted, to build a new school, which, in my opinion, was the best move we ever made in my elementary school. And that was the second. The second was this building the Smith Academy, and I think there were resources. Personally, I really think there's potential over there to do something like this and bring it, and that would be a real community. When you talk about community, to bring some additional housing down to your center of town, and enough to not be intrusive. And I know a lot of the Main Street people would be considered not my backyard type of thing. We're going to develop that. The school, I don't know if we're going to, lose the field hockey field, okay, under the most proposal. Well, maybe it's time for the school to consider, they've been around for 35 years, their total athletic fields, improving that, going forward with that. There's money out there now for recreation and, different grants out there to rehab them. Maybe the school department could look at that as a part of a proposal if the field hockey field was to be given up. I know there's a lot of sentiment about it, but the town's 300 plus years old. We just got to keep moving forward. And I think this is a good opportunity to move it. Or, like the other alternative, to knock it down. Keep an open space. So that's the best we could come up with at this point in time. So Any other further questions, or?
There are.
Does it make sense to put a restriction on time on, you know, there's a authorization to sell that's valid for 2 years. At the end of that 2 years, if it hasn't been sold, the conclusion is you raise it, it's all voted, it's one motion, you know, we either poop or get off the pot.
Right.
You know, that's really what has to happen,
Sure.
you know, in my
Sure.
mind.
I think that's very,
You know, what we don't want is an authorization to sell and then we keep waiting for the magic developer to come along and we wait 10 years and we end up with a building with no value and, you know, nothing can happen.
we've had that scenario in the past with the, you know, the proposals that were put into the building before and never came to fruition, so.
But you always have the option to call a special town meeting. In other words, mere fact that there's an authorization to sell, as happened in the past, there was an authorization to sell and it was revoked, and that can be done. Any citizen can petition to put an article in the town meeting warrant, or to call a special town meeting. So, you know, nothing is ironclad, is what I'm saying.
I understand that.
And there are other restrictions. I don't know if you want to hit on some of them, Jim, that you had mentioned to us, like the facade.
Yeah, and let me go back to this comment here, because you would want to do that. You'd want to put, I mean, it does take it can take a good number of years, 2, 3 years, to get all your financing in place. Give you an example, I think it's probably was, what, 5 years ago, in Holyoke Catholic property was purchased, and just now they broke ground this past, maybe 8, 9 months ago, they'll actually be occupying probably in the spring, because they had to get all their housing, they get their historic tax credits, and if they're getting historic tax credits here, then you have to get design approvals from Mass Historic. So it just takes time. However, but you can outline in your RFP, and you can have them give you a schedule. And if they deviate from the schedule, realize it might take 3 years or 3.5 years to actually now break ground. And after year 1 or year 2, they're even closer to schedule, then you could do that right. You can regain control of the properties. Then you can put in there to do that, and that's been done in many places. But we did talk about restrictions, and yeah, I know we were involved in a project in town of Chester, was a school building, and part of that, and in the presentation made at town meeting, the intention the town wanted to do with that building, and when it was transferred, there's restrictions on keeping the exterior appearance on the facade. They had a clock tower. They had other things which the new owner had to maintain and keep as part of that agreement. And in their case, they also kept, the town had access, there was just a playground on the site, and there was parking that they used for the town hall. That was all part of the agreement. The town had rights of use for those facilities. So you can decide with your committee things like that, and other things in terms of how you want to maintain site control, the site appearance of the property.
Mark?
Whose ultimate decision will it be, the final reconfiguration of what restrictions go on the property, what amount of land will be sold? I mean, is that gonna be this follow-up committee, or is that gonna be the Board of Selectmen?
I would think jointly, probably, Jeff. You'd listen to the recommendation of the committee, like you live, you know.
I would say
Well,
be the
once the
second.
Board of Selectmen get the authority to sell, it's ultimately their responsibility to
Right.
execute that. But clearly, it's not gonna happen in a vacuum.
It's gonna be,
This whole issue's been going on for over a decade, still looking close.
I mean, it seems to me the town meeting warrant is the important linchpin. I mean, would there be a possibility the board would consider an article that does not sell the whole property, but leaves part of it under ownership by the town? Or is that yet to be decided?
Well, actually, the draft article as currently written says all or a portion of. Just leaving it.
that was our last discussion, I believe, our last meeting, and it was very, you know, the same sentiment you had, why sell it all? And so I think the language that Paul came up with, or portion, you know, in the RFP.
Doesn't really tighten it up, it actually leaves it kind of vague, really, you know.
Well, intentionally, because if we go go through this RFP process, we want to see what comes back. And if we don't, we need, we want to be able to, I think there's going to be a fine line here. We want to be able to put some restrictions on it, but you also don't want to straitjacket the developer. Otherwise, you're not going to get anything.
There's certainly the opportunity for the developer to improve the back piece, plantings, whatever, and then donate that back to the town, and it becomes more advantageous for him donating it back than to have not purchased it in the beginning. So there's those scenarios that have to be looked at.
Yeah, it seems to me to be, if you're leaving too much up to a developer or too much up to what might occur, I think you.
But again, we have the right of refusal, and that's something you're gonna have to, when you work with a developer, you gotta work with them, and that's why I said that as a committee, our committee felt that next committee is the most important if the authorization to sell. And and you've gotta get people on that committee who have the sentiment for the protection, also have the knowledge in, the building codes and things like that, to restrict a developer from going too crazy on the whole thing. And you got to know how to put the different restrictions on it. Jim?
Yeah, again, when you do, if the town votes and finally it does go to an RFP, you clearly put in the RFP that the town will give higher weight and preference to, or has preference to retain the back 2.5 acres. You can have a little site plan. The town is going to give higher preference to a development which has between 30 and 40 units. The town will give higher preference to, or actually the town is requiring certain historic considerations and restrictions on the side. The town will give higher preference to, and you list those out. So if you get proposals and none of them meet your preference, you can reject them all. Or someone comes in with maybe a greater fee for the building, but doesn't meet your preferences, but you got someone with a lesser fee, meet your preferences, you have the option to go with the other proposal, if it's what you want. So you're going to build yourself a lot of flexibility, and you will not make your decision until you build in all your best needs.
Yes, you don't want to straitjacket a developer. At the same time, it's very important, I've always advocated, as most people know, that I would like to see that site preserved for use for the town. I don't really want to sell it to a private developer, but after having served in this committee, I don't think we have much choice, quite frankly. But at the same time, we want to put a historical footprint on that building so that it looks very much like it is right now. So at least when you come into the center of this town, it's an attractive building. And that's very important, I think, for the future of this town. And at the same time, I think it's important that we preserve the waterfront property, quite frankly, for future use.
Well, and improve the access there too.
Anyone else, or any more comments? Again, this whole scenario will be played out at the fall special town meeting on October 21st, correct? And the warrant will be posted 14 days before the meeting, so the articles will be able to be reviewed. And online, Paul, too? It will be. Can you put it on the website? Okay. And anyone who wants to read, the report and go into any more detail, it's out there on the website, so you'll be able to get it. Or you can come to Paul's office, town administrator's office, and get the CD and just take it and go through it and look and bring your questions to town meeting. I guess that's, Jim?
Just note, there is a required public hearing next week with the Board of Selectmen. And so there's another opportunity, but the public hearing is more to go through the process that's been complied with the grant terms, what the objective of the grant was. But again, there'll be just a real brief synopsis of what the grant covered and then the final report, but just very brief. It's more to see that the grant met the conditions. And again, there's a mandatory requirement for a second public hearing once the project is completed, which it is not complete. So again, there is another public opportunity, but it's not going to be the extent of a presentation like this. It's more to meet the grant terms that's required.
And that grant helped us, was very instrumental in helping us getting, the architect and also the assistance from Pioneer Valley to really look into this building. And you know, and again, I say it again, our Waterloo is upon us, so let's see if we can do something at the October town meeting.
And we are very grateful to the architect for doing a very good job for the
Thank you.
town.
Thank you, and thank everybody that worked with you.
I will, yeah.
That's it?
Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you very much.